If you've ever trusted the wrong person and pushed away the right one, then this story is going to hit you harder than you expect. 3 days before his wedding, Raymond Cross overheard his fiancée on a call with her attorney. She was standing in the walk-in closet of the house Raymond had built, speaking in the low, efficient voice of a woman conducting a transaction. She said, "Once we're married, we restructure the household. The first thing that goes is the old woman." Raymond could have confronted her. He could have walked into that closet and ended it. But Raymond Cross was 58 years old, lonely in the way that only wealthy widowers are lonely. And he had already chosen to believe the lie because the truth, that the only person who truly loved him was the 71-year-old woman his fiancée was planning to remove, was a truth that required Raymond to look at himself. And Raymond was not yet ready for that mirror. He married Vanessa Cole on a Saturday. By Monday, he had fired Opal Henderson. And the consequences of that firing would dismantle his business, fracture his health, destroy his family's legacy, and bring him, 8 months later, to his knees on the porch of a woman he didn't deserve, holding a shoebox full of everything he had been too proud to keep. Welcome, welcome. Please hit that subscribe button and like this video. Now tell us, where are you tuning in from? Dallas, Durban, maybe Bridgetown or Toronto? We read every single comment. Now, what I'm about to tell you is going to make you angry, and it should. Because Opal Henderson gave this man 23 years of her life, not as a wife, not as family, but as something harder to define and easier to discard. The help. And what he did to her is the kind of betrayal that doesn't leave a bruise on the body. It leaves a bruise on the soul. So let me tell you about Opal, because she deserves to be known before she's discarded. And she deserves to be remembered the way she lived, quietly, completely, and without a single person understanding what she was holding up until she stopped holding it. Opal Henderson was 71 years old. She was 5'1", short enough that she kept a step stool in every room of Raymond's house because reaching the high shelves required assistance, and Opal did not ask for assistance. She had silver hair she wore in a braid that she pinned in a circle at the back of her head, and she had a face that looked like a map of everywhere she'd been. Deep lines around the eyes from decades of squinting in kitchens without proper lighting. Lines around the mouth from talking to children who needed comforting and adults who needed managing. And a jawline that was soft but set. The jaw of a woman who had opinions and expressed them through her work rather than her words. She had a habit of humming while she cooked. Hymns mostly, old Baptist hymns from the church in Opelousas, Louisiana, where she grew up. And the humming was so much a part of Raymond's house that when it stopped, the silence it left behind was not silence. It was an amputation. She wore flat shoes, always flat shoes, black, soft-soled, the kind that made no sound on hardwood floors, because Opal believed that a person who takes care of a house should move through it like weather, present everywhere, visible nowhere. She kept a tin of peppermints in her apron pocket. She offered them to everyone who entered the house. She had been offering peppermints for 23 years, and in 23 years, only 3 people had ever declined. A plumber in 2007, a real estate appraiser in 2015, and Vanessa Cole on the day she first walked through the front door in February 2023. Opal noticed the refusal. She noticed it the way a woman who has spent a lifetime reading households notices things. Not dramatically, not accusatorily, but with the quiet internal filing system of a person who stores data points until they form a pattern. And patterns, in Opal's experience, always eventually told the truth. Opal had worked for the Cross family for 23 years, since 1999, when Raymond's first wife, Helen, hired her. Helen Cross was the reason Opal existed in that house, and Helen Cross was the reason the house existed at all. Because Helen was the one who had turned a 4-bedroom colonial in the Garden District of Baton Rouge from a structure into a home. Helen was warm where Raymond was reserved. Helen was soft where Raymond was angular. Helen laughed in the kitchen and sang in the shower and left handwritten notes on the counter that said things like, "Opal, the roses are blooming. Go look." Helen treated Opal not as an employee, but as a collaborator. 2 women running a household together, managing a man who was good at making money and poor at making warmth, which is the most common imbalance in wealthy marriages, and the one that most often requires a third person to correct. Helen died in May 2018, ovarian cancer. She was 54. The diagnosis came in November 2017, and by May she was gone. And the 6 months in between were the kind of 6 months that compress a lifetime of love into a space so small it becomes pressurized, explosive, holy. Opal was there for all of it. She cooked the meals Helen couldn't eat. She changed the sheets Helen soaked through with night sweats. She sat in the hospital room on the nights Raymond couldn't bear to, and she held Helen's hand and hummed the hymns from Opelousas, and Helen said once near the end, "Opal, you're the best thing about that house. Promise me you'll take care of him." Opal promised, and she kept that promise for 5 years with the ferocity and precision of a woman who understood that some promises are not spoken to be kept for a season. They are spoken to be kept for a life. But what happened next changed everything. After Helen died, the house went quiet the way houses go quiet when the person who made the noise is gone. Not just sonically, but spiritually, as though the walls had absorbed Helen's energy and were slowly releasing it, molecule by molecule, until the air itself felt thinner. Raymond retreated. He went to work. He came home. He ate the dinner Opal cooked, always at the kitchen table, never in the dining room, because the dining room was where Helen had sat, and Raymond could not look at her empty chair. He spoke in short sentences. He went to bed early. He became, over the span of 5 years, a man whose life had been reduced to a routine so rigid that any deviation felt like a threat. Opal managed the deviation. She managed it the way she managed everything, invisibly, completely, without credit. She paid the household bills because Raymond forgot. She coordinated the maintenance because Raymond didn't notice the roof leak with the furnace failing or the oak tree in the backyard that was dying from the inside and needed to be removed before it fell on the garage. She called Raymond's doctor when Raymond skipped his annual physical for 3 consecutive years. She called Raymond's daughter, Camille, 34, who lived in Houston with her husband and 2 sons, and gave her updates because Raymond didn't call and Camille was too proud to call first, and the silence between a father and a daughter after a mother dies is a specific kind of silence that requires a third party to break. And Opal was that party. She called every Sunday. She told Camille about the meals, about the bills, about the oak tree. She told Camille that her father was eating, sleeping, functioning. She told Camille the truth. "He's alive, baby, but he's not living. He's just going through the motions, and the motions are the only thing keeping him upright." Camille said, "Can't you do something?" Opal said, "I am doing something. I'm keeping the house standing. The rest is up to him." But what Opal didn't know yet was that the thing coming for her was not grief. It was a woman. Vanessa Cole arrived in Raymond's life in January 2023. She was 44, 14 years younger than Raymond, with a polished surface that suggested money she didn't have and a manner that suggested breeding she had learned rather than inherited. She was a consultant, the word she used, specializing in lifestyle optimization for high net worth individuals, which is a phrase that means nothing and promises everything, and attracts exactly the kind of man who has stopped managing his own life and is looking for someone to manage it for him. She met Raymond at a charity gala in Baton Rouge, the kind of event where wealthy men write checks to feel useful and attractive women circulate to find the men whose signatures are worth the most. Vanessa identified Raymond within 20 minutes. A widower, large house, construction company worth $14 million. A loneliness so visible it could have been listed on a name tag. She was careful. She was strategic. She didn't rush. She called it patience, but it was pacing. The measured deployment of attention calibrated to produce dependency. She had lunch with Raymond in February, dinner in March. She attended Easter service with him at the church Helen used to drag him to. She wore blue, Helen's favorite color, not because she knew this, but because blue suited her complexion, and the coincidence worked in her favor the way coincidences always work in the favor of people who are already moving in the right direction. By June, she was spending weekends at the house. By September, she had a key. By November, Raymond proposed with a ring he had purchased at a store Vanessa had casually mentioned admiring in August, a detail she had planted like a seed and that had bloomed exactly on schedule. Opal watched it all. She watched the way she watched everything, from the kitchen, from the hallway, from the margins of a life she had been managing for 23 years. She watched Vanessa rearrange the living room, moving Helen's photographs to the guest room, replacing the floral curtains with linen panels, changing the kitchen from a place that smelled like cinnamon and butter to a place that smelled like the scented candles Vanessa ordered online. Candles that cost $38 each and smelled like Moroccan cedar and coastal fog, which are not real smells, but marketing copy designed for people who have replaced experience with aesthetics. Opal said nothing. She hummed her hymns, she cooked her meals, she offered her peppermints, and she waited, because Opal Henderson had been reading households for 46 years. She had started at 25, cleaning homes in Opelousas before moving to Baton Rouge in 1988. And she knew that women like Vanessa operate on timelines. There would be a moment, there would be a move, and when it came, Opal would be ready. The move came in February 2024, 3 days before the wedding. Raymond overheard the phone call. He heard, "The first thing that goes is the old woman." He heard it, and he did nothing. He married Vanessa on Saturday. On Monday morning, Vanessa sat at the kitchen table, Helen's table, Opal's table, the table where 23 years of meals and bills and conversations had taken place, and said, "Raymond, we need to talk about Opal." Raymond set down his coffee. He knew what was coming. He had known since the closet. Vanessa said, "She's 71. She's been here for 23 years. It's time to modernize the household. I want to bring in a service, a professional team. Scheduled, efficient, accountable. Opal is wonderful, but she's from a different era." Vanessa smiled. The smile was the same smile she had used at the gala, at the lunches, at the Easter service. It was a tool. "I'll handle it if you want. You don't have to be the one to tell her." Raymond said, "No, I'll tell her." "If you think that was bad, wait until you hear how he did it." He called Opal into the living room, the room Vanessa had rearranged, the room where Helen's photographs no longer hung, the room that smelled like Moroccan cedar and coastal fog. Opal walked in. She was wearing her flat shoes, her apron, her braid pinned in its circle. She had a peppermint in her pocket. She had been humming "Blessed Assurance" in the kitchen. Raymond didn't look at her when he spoke. He looked at the floor. He said, "Opal, Vanessa and I have decided to make some changes to the household. We're going to bring in a professional cleaning service. I want to thank you for everything you've done. You've been very important to this family." Opal stood still. She looked at Raymond's face, not at his eyes, which were on the floor, but at his jaw, which was clenched, and at his hands, which were gripping the arm of the chair. She saw what she always saw in that house, a man who couldn't say what he meant, and who meant more than he could say. She said, "Are you firing me, Raymond?" He closed his eyes. "I'm making a change." "That's not what I asked." Yes. Opal nodded once. She untied her apron. She folded it, neatly, the way she folded everything. The way she had folded Helen's clothes for the donation boxes after the funeral, carefully, as though the fabric remembered the body it had held. She placed the apron on the arm of the chair. She reached into the pocket and took out the tin of peppermints and set it on top of the apron. She looked at Raymond. "I promised Helen I would take care of you," Opal said. Her voice was steady, not cold. Opal didn't do cold. Steady in the way that load-bearing walls are steady, the way things that hold up other things are steady, without drama, without visible strain, just the quiet, constant work of standing. "I have kept that promise for 5 years. I have paid your bills and called your doctor and phoned your daughter every Sunday because you wouldn't. I have cooked your meals and washed your sheets and hummed in your kitchen because Helen asked me to fill the silence she knew you would create. And I have watched this woman walk into your house and move your wife's pictures and change your wife's curtains and sit in your wife's chair, and I have said nothing because it was not my place to say. But I will say this." She paused. She looked at him with the full weight of 23 years. You are not making a change, Raymond. You are making a mistake, and by the time you understand that, I will not be here to fix it. She walked to the front door. She put on her coat, a brown wool coat, worn but clean, the same coat she had worn for 9 years. She opened the door. She looked back once. Raymond was sitting in the chair with his eyes closed and the apron folded on the armrest and the peppermints on top, and the house already felt different, emptier, colder, as though Opal's departure had opened a window somewhere, and the Moroccan cedar was leaking out, and the nothing was leaking in. She said, "Take care of yourself, Raymond. Nobody else in this house is going to." And she left. Now here is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. The consequences began within a week. Not dramatically. Consequences never begin dramatically. They begin the way leaks begin, the way termites begin, the way the absence of a person who held everything together begins, with small failures that accumulate until the small becomes structural. The bills were the first sign. Opal had been paying them. Water, electric, gas, property tax, insurance, through an online system she had set up on the household computer. Raymond didn't know the passwords. He didn't know the account numbers. He didn't know the payment dates. The electric bill went past due in March. The water bill went past due in April. The property tax was late, for the first time in 23 years, and a penalty of $1,400 was assessed. Raymond tried to call the utility companies. He sat at the kitchen table with a phone and a stack of envelopes, and he realized, with the slow, dawning horror of a man who has outsourced his entire domestic life, that he did not know how his own house worked. The cleaning service Vanessa hired was efficient. They came twice a week, a team of 3, uniformed, fast, thorough. They cleaned surfaces, they vacuumed floors, they sanitized bathrooms. They did not hum. They did not know that the third shelf in the pantry was where Helen kept the Christmas china, and that it needed to be dusted gently because 2 of the plates had hairline cracks that would worsen with pressure. They did not know that the oak tree in the backyard, the one Opal had flagged for removal, was now leaning 12 degrees, and that a strong storm would bring it down on the garage. They did not know that Raymond took his blood pressure medication at 7 a.m. with a glass of water and half a grapefruit, and that Opal had set the pill bottle next to the grapefruit every morning for 5 years because Raymond forgot if the visual cue wasn't there. The cleaning service cleaned. They did not care. Cleaning and caring are different verbs, and the distance between them is the distance between a house and a home. Raymond's health declined. Without Opal's silent management, the grapefruit, the pills, the doctor's appointments she scheduled, the meals she calibrated to his cardiologist's recommendations, Raymond's blood pressure crept upward. He gained weight. He stopped sleeping well. He developed a persistent cough that Opal would have recognized as the early sign of the bronchitis he got every spring, and that required a humidifier in the bedroom and an extra pillow to elevate his head. Nobody told him. Nobody noticed. Vanessa didn't notice because Vanessa was not paying attention to Raymond's body. She was paying attention to his accounts. But the real shock was still coming. Camille stopped receiving Sunday calls. For 5 years, Opal had called every Sunday, 10 a.m., like clockwork, with a report on Raymond's health, his mood, his meals, the house. When the calls stopped, Camille assumed her father had finally started calling himself. He hadn't. Raymond didn't call because Raymond had never been the one who called, and the habit had belonged to Opal. And habits don't transfer. They die with the person who held them. 3 months passed without contact between Raymond and his daughter. 3 months of silence that Camille interpreted as intentional, and Raymond didn't interpret at all because he didn't notice. A man who doesn't notice that the pills aren't next to the grapefruit will not notice that the phone hasn't rung. In June 2024, the oak tree fell. A thunderstorm, not even a severe one, just a strong summer storm, brought it down on the garage at 2 a.m. The tree crushed the roof, destroyed the Mercedes Raymond had parked inside, and sent a branch through the back window of the kitchen. Raymond and Vanessa were asleep. The crash woke the neighborhood. Raymond stood in the rain in his pajamas, looking at the tree Opal had told him to remove 2 years ago. and he felt something shift inside him. Not the sudden crack of revelation, but the slow groan of a structure that has been weakening for months and is finally beginning to show it. The insurance company sent an adjuster. The adjuster looked at the tree, looked at the garage, looked at the branch in the kitchen window, and said, "Mr. Cross, this tree had internal rot. It should have been removed at least a year ago. Did you have a maintenance plan?" Raymond said no. The adjuster said the claim would be processed, but that the policy had a $5,000 deductible and that future claims related to deferred maintenance could be denied. Raymond stood in his kitchen with glass on the floor and rain coming through the window, and he thought about Opal, who had filed the maintenance requests, who had called the arborist, who had told him about the tree, who had done everything except cut it down herself because that required a signature and a check and a decision. And decisions were Raymond's job. And Raymond hadn't made one because Opal's warnings had been so constant and so reliable that Raymond had treated them the way people treat gravity, as a background force that required no action because it was always there. And that is the thing about people who hold things up. You don't feel their weight until they let go. And just when Raymond thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. In August 2024, 8 months after the firing, Vanessa's plan matured. She presented Raymond with a document, a post-nuptial agreement that restructured ownership of the house, the company, and the investment accounts to include her as a co-owner. She framed it as financial protection for both of us. She had a lawyer. The lawyer had prepared the documents. The documents were dense and specific and designed to be signed rather than read. Raymond read them. Not because he was suspicious. By now you might wonder how a man this obtuse managed to build a $14 million company, and the answer is that Raymond was brilliant at construction and catastrophic at people. He read them because reading contracts was the one thing his professional life had trained him to do. And what he read made his hands go cold. The postnup would give Vanessa 50% ownership of the house. It would give her 30% of cross-construction. It would name her as beneficiary on 2 of his 3 insurance policies. And it contained a clause, buried in paragraph 14, subsection C, that stipulated if the marriage ended within 5 years, Vanessa would receive a $2 million lump sum payment as dissolution compensation. Raymond looked at the document. He looked at Vanessa. He saw the smile. He saw, for the first time, what Opal had seen the day Vanessa declined the peppermint. He saw a woman who had entered his house the way termites enter a house, through the cracks, invisibly, structurally, eating from the inside while the outside still looked solid. He didn't sign. He called his attorney. His attorney reviewed the documents and said, "Raymond, don't sign this. This is a wealth extraction instrument disguised as a marital agreement." Raymond said, "I know what it is." The attorney said, "How did she get this far?" Raymond closed his eyes. "Because I fired the only person who was watching." What Raymond was about to discover would change everything. The confrontation happened in the living room. Vanessa's living room now. The room with the linen panels and the scented candles and the absence of Helen's photographs. Raymond set the postnup on the coffee table. He said, "I'm not signing this." Vanessa's smile didn't falter. It adjusted. A small recalibration, like a thermostat. "Raymond, this is standard protection. 3 days before the wedding, you told your attorney that the first thing to go was the old woman." Vanessa went still. "I was in the hallway," Raymond said. "I heard every word. I married you anyway because I was lonely, and because you made me feel like the house wasn't empty. But the house isn't empty because Helen is gone. The house is empty because I fired the woman who is keeping it alive." Vanessa's mask slipped. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies. It slipped the way a mask slips when the adhesive has been wearing down for months, and the person behind it is too tired to press it back. She said, "You're choosing a housekeeper over your wife?" Raymond said, "She's not my housekeeper. She's the person who kept this house standing for 23 years. She's the person who called my daughter when I wouldn't. She's the person who put my pills next to the grapefruit and hummed in the kitchen so the silence didn't swallow me. And she's the person who looked at you on day one and didn't trust you. And I ignored her because I wanted to believe that somebody new could fill the space that Helen left. He paused. Nobody can fill that space, Vanessa. Not you. Not anyone. But Opal wasn't trying to fill it. She was just trying to keep the room around it from collapsing. And I let you convince me to tear her out like she was wallpaper. Raymond stood up. He said the line that his attorney would later repeat, that Camille would later frame, that Opal would later hold against her chest the way she held everything Raymond gave her, carefully, without assuming it would last. I didn't fire an employee, I fired the foundation, and the building fell. Vanessa moved out in September. She took the scented candles, she took the linen panels, she took the things she had brought and left the things that had been there before her, which was everything that mattered. Helen's photographs, Opal's apron, the tin of peppermints still sitting on the armrest where Opal had placed them 8 months earlier. Nobody had moved them. The cleaning service had dusted around them. The divorce was filed in October. It was fast. Vanessa had no legal claim to the house or the company. The prenuptial agreement Raymond's original attorney had insisted on held firm. She received nothing beyond what the prenup specified, a $15,000 settlement and her personal belongings. She was gone by November. But the house was still broken. Raymond sat at the kitchen table the evening Vanessa left. The branch hole in the window had been repaired. The oak tree had been removed. Finally, months late, the stump still raw in the yard. The bills were current. He had learned the passwords, the account numbers, the payment dates. He could manage the mechanics of his own life now. But the kitchen was quiet. The humming was gone. The peppermint tin was empty. And the grapefruit was missing from the counter because nobody was placing it there. He drove to Opal's apartment, a small one-bedroom on North Foster Drive, in a complex where the railing wobbled and the parking lot lights didn't all work. He had never been to Opal's home. In 23 years, he had never once visited the place where Opal lived when she wasn't living in his house. He hadn't known the address until he asked his attorney's assistant to find it. He hadn't known that Opal's apartment had one window, one closet, and a kitchen so small that the oven door touched the opposite wall when it was open. He hadn't known because he hadn't asked, and not asking was the foundation on which every failure of the past 8 months had been built. He knocked. Opal opened the door. She was wearing a house dress and slippers, and her braid was down, unpinned, loose over one shoulder, gray and long, and Raymond had never seen it down before. She looked smaller without the apron. She looked older without the kitchen. She looked like a woman who had been a building's infrastructure and was now just a woman standing in a doorway. And the reduction from one to the other made Raymond's chest hurt in a way that no cardiologist could diagnose. "Opal," he said. She looked at him. She didn't invite him in. She didn't close the door. She stood in the threshold and she waited, the way she had waited for 23 years. Patiently, completely, without needing him to perform. "I'm sorry," Raymond said. "I am so sorry." Opal said, "For which part?" Raymond almost smiled. Almost. "For all of it. For listening to her instead of you. For firing you in the room she redecorated. For not calling Camille. For not removing the tree. For not knowing my own passwords. For not coming here sooner. For not ever coming here at all." He paused. "For 23 years of you taking care of me and me never once asking if you needed taking care of." Opal's jaw softened. The set loosened. The map of her face rearranged slightly. Not a smile, not forgiveness, but an opening. A crack in the wall that was small enough to be a window. "Come in," she said. He came in. He sat at her kitchen table, small, square, with 2 chairs. She made coffee. She hummed while she made it. Blessed assurance. The sound filled the small apartment the way it had filled the large house. Completely, instantly, as though the hymn had been waiting in Opal's throat for 8 months and was glad to be released. Raymond brought a shoebox. He set it on the table. Inside were the things Vanessa had removed from the house and that Raymond had retrieved from the guest room closet where they had been stored. Helen's photographs, 7 of them in their original frames. A Christmas ornament Helen had made at a craft class in 2011. A birthday card Helen had written to Opal in 2016 that said, "To the woman who runs this house and the man who lives in it, we are both lost without you." And the apron. Opal's apron, folded the way Opal had folded it, still creased from the last time she had worn it. Opal looked at the shoebox. She looked at the photographs. She picked up the birthday card and read it, and her eyes filled, and she pressed the card against her chest, against the place where the apron had rested for 23 years, the place where the promises were stored. "Helen was the best person I ever worked for," Opal said quietly, "and you were the most difficult. But she loved you, and I promised her." Raymond said, "I know, and you threw the promise away." Raymond didn't argue. He didn't defend. He sat in the small kitchen of the woman he had discarded, and he accepted the sentence, because it was accurate, and because accuracy, when delivered by a 71-year-old woman in slippers who had hummed your house alive for 23 years, requires no response except silence. Opal poured the coffee. She set a cup in front of Raymond. She sat down across from him. She reached into the pocket of her house dress and pulled out a peppermint. Not from the tin, from a bag she kept for herself. She set it on the table between them. "Take it," she said. Raymond took the peppermint. He unwrapped it slowly. He put it in his mouth, and the taste, sharp, sweet, familiar, traveled through 30 years of Opal's presence and landed on the specific, precise place in his memory where home lived. Not the house. Not the colonial in the garden district with the linen panels and the Moroccan cedar. Home. The feeling of being inside something that someone has cared for. The feeling of a hymn in a kitchen. The feeling of a peppermint offered without condition. "Come back," Raymond said. "Please." Opal sipped her coffee. She looked at him over the rim of the cup, the way she looked over the rim of everything, with the careful assessment of a woman who had been reading people for 46 years and who knew that what a man says in a moment of need is different from what a man does in a moment of comfort. She said, "I'll come back on 2 conditions. 1, Helen's photographs go back on the wall, every single one, in the exact places they were before." Raymond nodded. 2, you call Camille. Tonight. You tell her you're sorry for the silence, and you tell her about Vanessa, and you tell her the truth, that you fired the woman who was the only bridge between you and your daughter. You tell her all of it. And then you ask her to come home for Thanksgiving. And if she says no, you call again next week, and the week after. You don't stop calling until she picks up. Raymond said, "What if she's too angry?" Opal set down her coffee. She looked at him with 23 years of patience and said, "Raymond Cross, I was too angry, and I opened the door. Your daughter has your stubbornness and her mother's heart. She'll open the door. You just have to knock." Raymond called Camille that night, from Opal's kitchen, on Opal's phone. Because his phone was in the car and Opal's phone was on the wall, a landline, beige, corded, the kind that doesn't run out of battery because some things are more reliable when they're attached to a wall. Camille answered. She was angry. She was hurt. She said, "You haven't called me in 8 months, Daddy." Raymond said, "I know. I didn't call because Opal was the one who called, and I fired Opal, and without her I forgot how to reach you, and that's not an excuse. That's a confession." Camille was quiet. Then she said, "Is she there?" Raymond said, "I'm sitting in her kitchen." Camille said, "Put her on." Opal took the phone. She listened. She said, "I'm fine, baby. He's a mess, but I'm fine." Camille laughed, the first laugh in the conversation, and Opal smiled, and the smile was the real one, the one that lived under the braid and the apron and the flat shoes, the one that came out when the house was working the way it was supposed to work, connected, warm, full of the noise that families make when they remember they are families. Today, Raymond Cross is 60 years old. Opal Henderson is 73. She works at the house 3 days a week now, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, because Opal has decided that 73 is the age at which a woman earns the right to take Tuesdays and Thursdays for herself. On her days off, she tends a small garden in the yard of her apartment building. Tomatoes, herbs, marigolds. She hums while she gardens. Same hymns, same volume, same opal. Helen's photographs are back on the wall, every single one, in their original positions. Opal made sure of it. She had taken photographs of the photographs' locations before Vanessa moved them, because Opal documented everything, because documentation is how invisible women prove they were there. Camille came for Thanksgiving. She brought her husband and her 2 sons, and the boys ran through the house the way children run through houses they've never been to, touching everything, opening everything, shouting their discoveries to each other across rooms. Raymond watched them from the kitchen. Opal was cooking. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and butter and something warm and old that had nothing to do with candles and everything to do with the woman standing at the stove with her braid pinned in its circle and a peppermint in her pocket. Camille hugged Opal. She held on for a long time. She said, "Thank you for calling me all those Sundays." Opal said, "Thank you for picking up." Camille said, "Are you going to stay?" Opal looked at Raymond. Raymond looked at the floor, old habit. And then he looked up, at Opal, at his daughter, at the kitchen that smelled the way a kitchen is supposed to smell, and he said, "She's staying, as long as she wants. The door doesn't close." Opal reached into her pocket. She pulled out a peppermint. She held it out to Camille's oldest son, a 7-year-old named Marcus, who had been standing in the doorway watching the adults with the solemn attention of a child who knows that something important is happening, even if he doesn't know what. Marcus took the peppermint. He unwrapped it. He put it in his mouth. He said, "It's good." Opal said, "I know, baby. It's always good." On the armrest of the chair in the living room, the same armrest where Opal had placed the apron and the tin of peppermints 8 months earlier, sits a new tin. Full. Peppermints. Opal refills it every Monday. She has been refilling it for 23 years. She will refill it for as long as the chair holds weight and the house holds people and the hymn holds a melody. Some things don't need to be grand to be permanent. Some things just need to be refilled. A man fired the woman who held his life together because a newer woman told him the old one was obsolete. The building fell. The tree came down. The bills went unpaid. The daughter stopped hearing from home. And the man sat in a kitchen that no longer hummed and understood, 8 months too late, that the most important person in his house had never been the one sleeping in his bed. She was the one standing at his stove, humming a hymn from Opelousas, with flat shoes and a peppermint, and a promise she made to his dying wife that she kept long after he deserved it. That is not employment. That is not service. That is the kind of devotion that has no contract and no hourly rate and no end date, because it was never about the money. It was about the promise. And the promise was about the house. And the house was about the people inside it. And the people inside it were only standing because one woman, quiet, short, invisible, was holding up the walls. And so the story ends. But before you go, like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. Tell us where you're watching from and what this story taught you. We read every single comment. See you in the next story.